Opening credits. Tigers Bond. A Ménage Tiger Shifter short story. By Summer Cooper. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Chapter 1. Gail stared into the mirror, the drink she'd already consumed making her eyes a little blurry. For a moment, she saw a beautiful model, black hair creating a fringe that highlighted the depths of her brown eyes. Those same dark brown eyes were framed beautifully with smoky eye makeup that gave her a sultry look. In that moment, her 6-foot height didn't make her look like a freak compared to her friends. She wasn't the giant that stood over all of her dainty tiny friends. Then her vision cleared, and while she remained beautiful, she saw a girl with a jawbone that was a little too strong and shoulders that were just a smidge too broad. Sighing, she turned from the mirror and went to stand against the wall until her friends came out of their own stalls. Reality sucked hard, and she closed her eyes for a moment, her head swimming from the drink and her thoughts. Her sad smile disappeared the moment Allison walked out of her stall, the perky, always smiling blonde's current grin infecting Gail with a happiness she never quite understood, but went with despite herself. If it wasn't for Allison, Gail would probably always be gloomy. Watching her friend wash her hands, Gail wondered what it must be like to be normal, her thoughts turning gloomy again, but she brushed the thought aside. "Where are we heading now?" Gail asked Allison as their friend Petra came out of her stall. "We're going where the boys are," Petra roared in her usual boisterous manner, throwing her arms in the air as her voice rose and her skirt went with it. Petra hardly ever wore long skirts, only tiny things that barely covered her bum. "I need a man tonight, and by God, I'm going to have one. We're in Manchester, surely we can find a man in this place?" Gail looked at Petra, doubting Petra would be awake for too many more hours, much less capable of having
censored
with anyone. She'd keep an eye on her anyway. That was Gail's usual role, caretaker and nanny, though none of the other girls seemed to realize it. Gail ran off the stubborn men who didn't want to take no for an answer, the ones that simply couldn't take a hint, and the sleazy ones that thought they had a chance with her at least. She'd had her own affairs, but she was usually too busy keeping these two out of trouble to bother. Stumbling out the doors of the club as she kept her friends upright, Gail wondered if she should just steer them back to their rooms. Petra stumbled again, her stiletto heel caught in the pavement and she landed on her knees. Gail bent to inspect her friend on the edge of the sidewalk, as Petra fell. She heard a motorbike but didn't look around as the noise came closer, more concerned with Petra. Just as it passed her, she felt something scratch her neck, a tearing sensation that made her cry out and reach her hand up to the now bleeding wound. "What the hell?" she screamed as she turned in the direction of the bike. She couldn't see anything now but the taillights of the vehicle as it disappeared into the dark. "What's up, Duck?" Allison asked, rushing over to Gail. "That ass just swiped me with something." "Is it bad?" Gail asked, angry at the assault, but moving her hair out of the way so Allison could inspect the wound. "Well, I believe we need to clean it up at least. Let's go back to our rooms, see what they might have to clean it with. Or do you want to go to emergency?" "I think we should have it looked at. You never know what people might be playing at doing things like this," Petra said as she took her own look at it. "Oh, they'll just treat me as another drunk in A&E, clogging up their emergency room at this time of night. I can't handle the snarky attitudes, or the wait at the moment. Let's just go back and see what it looks like. If it's bad, we'll go though. Have either of you got any clean tissues?" Gail placed the clean paper cloths Petra handed over on her neck, and they walked back to their rooms. In the light, Allison gently cleaned the wound, revealing several scratches, the one in the middle being the deepest. It looked like an animal had scratched her, but none of the wounds needed stitches. She placed some antibiotic salve on the scratches, then taped some gauze over the wounds to keep them clean. "That should do you, princess. I see Petra's passed out already. I guess we won't be going out again tonight then. I'll sleep in here if you want, and you can have the room with the single bed. Or do you want me to come in with you for a little while?" "I'll be fine, I think I'll just get to sleep myself." "What a screwed up night. I'd report it if I actually thought anything would be done, but I doubt anything will be. Disgusting." Gail shook her head and just walked down to her room. What the hell is wrong with people now? She wondered aloud, putting her hand to her neck. Letting herself into the room, she found some mirrors and contorted like a pretzel until she could see the wound. Oddly, it looked like it was healing already, the skin looking pink and smooth in spots, not like the ragged one in the middle, red and still weeping blood slightly. Snapping her compact shut, she moved the mirrors, changed her clothes, and got back into bed, thinking she'd check it again tomorrow. The scratch being on her neck was worrisome, but she really didn't want to go to A&E, it was just too frustrating. Closing her eyes, she drifted off to sleep, wondering what possessed some people because obviously something did. Her dreams were filled with hazel eyes, fire, and the body of a really fit man. A very tall man, taller even than Gail herself. His body was covered in well-defined muscles, giving hints of the power and precision the man possessed. She tried to see his face following him, putting her nose to the ground to keep track of his scent, a scent that filled her head with colors and sounds. She hunted him down a dark alley in the hopes of catching a glimpse of the man, but every time she caught up, pulling him to face her, he'd disappear, reappearing just steps ahead of her. She chased the dark-headed man, as the alley turned into a dense jungle before her very eyes, and still the man evaded her, every single time Gail would get close. She cried out, frustration making her ball up her fist, and finally she woke up, her own frustration driving her out of the comfort of the bed. Reaching a hand up to her neck, she felt some soreness but no stinging pain or heat that would signal infection. Taking her mirrors back out, she looked at the wound again, only to find it gone. Even the deep one from the middle was nothing more than a scar now. Shaking, she ran into Petra and Allison's room to wake them. "It's gone, it's healed, wake up, look. You're not going to believe this." "Oh, Gail. Ouch. Why do you have to be so loud so early?" "Hush, woman." Petra moaned miserably, pulling her pillow back over her head. "What are you on about, anyway? What happened last night?" Rolling her eyes at Petra, Gail turned to Allison, who'd sat up and was inspecting Gail's neck. "Do you see? It's completely healed." Gail shivered as Allison ran her finger over the scars, the light touch on her neck not uncomfortable or painful, but still somehow a weird sensation. Turning to Allison, she looked questioningly at her friend. "How is this possible?" Gail asked her. "How should I know? I'm not a doctor or medic. It is well strange though." Allison looked back at her friend with confusion. "What are you two blathering on about now?" Petra stuck her head out from under her pillow, her curiosity bringing her around to the land of the living. "Gail was attacked last night, don't you remember?" Allison prompted the other woman. "No, not a thing." "Let me see." Petra clambered out from under her duvet.
Censored.
But for her underclothes and tromped over to Gail. "I don't see anything, just an old scratch," Petra said, her doubt about her friend's sanity evident in her voice. "Exactly, this was bloody and open last night. Look, here's the cloth we used to clean it." Allison ran to the ensuite, pulling the damp face cloth out from a pile on the floor. The cloth was still wet and covered in Gail's blood. "Oh, it couldn't have been too bad if it's gone already. Come on, let's get packed and go home. You two are worrying over nothing, and I have to be at work tomorrow. Let's get going before the day is gone. Come on, stop lolling about, get moving." Petra made shooing motions, trying to get the other two ladies moving, dismissing the event already. Allison and Gail looked at each other, both doubting what Petra said about it not being that bad. They both knew what they'd seen. Gail breathed deep, let the breath out slowly, and decided to let it go for now. She needed to get home as well, and mysterious attacks and healing scratches would have to be dealt with later. Gail opened the door to her one-bedroom flat, barely more than a closet on an estate, the bathroom the only private room in the entire place. The open floor plan left the bedroom, living room, and kitchen open to public view, but Gail had hung curtains between the areas that she'd turned into a bedroom. Deep red velvet curtains that matched her duvet. She'd found the items at a clearance sale one of the charity shops had going last month. They were a bit expensive looking for the area Gail lived in, but they'd caught Gail's imagination, and she hadn't been able to put them down. They were the kind of things she wished she could afford, and for once she could. She'd handed over the money quickly, and practically ran home with her purchases, almost fearful someone in the shop would run after her, telling her they'd made a mistake. She hadn't gone back to the shop for 2 weeks after that, afraid she'd be caught out and they'd demand the curtains back. Silly, yes, but she loved the material, the richness of the color, and how they made the room look. The shimmer of the velvet, the softness of the material, added warmth to the room, sensuality, and the curtain provided Gail with a sense of privacy that she hadn't had previously. She didn't want them to show off in the windows. She wanted them for her own enjoyment, and every time she came home now, that's exactly what happened. She felt a sense of deep pleasure and satisfaction when she looked at those curtains, and she'd not regretted buying them once. She put her things away, putting the clothing she'd worn while she was gone into the washing machine, and dug through her post, seeing she'd had a card from her mother. It was a birthday card, and her mother asked to see her again. Gail threw the card down. She and her mates had gone to Manchester to celebrate her 25th birthday, though it was actually today, and the first part had been great. The last part not so much. Flicking her eyes at the card again, she picked up her phone, then put it back down. Her mother was an alcoholic, who often took money off of Gail. Fiona promised to pay it back but never did, and this had put Gail in a bind many times. Gail had left her mother behind after she was evicted, because of her mother's drunken rantings that saw her standing in the streets 2 or 3 times a week shrieking at the neighbors. She did not need her mother in her life again, not if she wasn't clean. Hearing the doorbell ring, she hoped her mother hadn't planned some kind of surprise and peeked out the window from behind a curtain. Seeing a rather tall man there, she walked over to the door and opened it, wondering who he could be, hoping it wasn't more bother. She just wanted peace and quiet for the rest of the day before she had to head back to her job as a barista at a local cafe in the morning. She had to be in by 5 a.m., so he'd best make it quick, whatever he wanted, because she had things to get done today. Gail opened the door and stood there gawping at the man. Wags everywhere would pull out their own fingernails for a chance at this man. A devilish grin revealed straight white teeth, surrounded by full sensual lips. Gleaming hazel eyes stared at her, a hunger there she could not define quickly masked behind a blank stare, and the rest of him, the chiseled cheekbones, the strong chin, the straight flawless nose that was perfect for his face, were all familiar to her, and a name breathed past her lips. Jeremy. She stood there shocked into immobility, certain she'd just called this man the wrong name. That's right, Jeremy Stonebridge at your service. May I come in? Thank you, lovely to meet you, though you are a good deal taller than I expected. The man rudely pushed past Gail, walking into her home to stare around, a look of distaste on his face. Right, well, I'm here as your guardian, no need to beat around the bush, is there? The committee sent me, after much deliberation apparently, or none at all I'd wager. I think they just thought it time I did my part, besides donating money to the cause. What questions do you have for me? He looked at Gail expectantly before sitting down on the couch, a couch he brushed off, she noted, before sitting down. Gail's eyes narrowed at his gestures, but his words confused her. She was going to change her middle name to Confused if this kept up, Gail thought. You're out of your box, what are you on about? Gail asked. I'm your guardian. Guardian. Sent by the committee, you're one of the Were people now, aren't you? You'll need a guardian, until you figure all of this out, and can manage on your own. Although, from the looks of you, you look like you may be able to manage on your own just fine. How tall are you anyway? Jeremy asked, not the least bit shy about his curiosity. I'm 6 foot, came the automatic response, more if I wear heels, obviously. You are a tall girl with big strong shoulders too. You hardly need a babysitter. I had hoped they were sending me to a male, but I see they chose a female for my first time. You aren't going to turn all tearful and girly on me, are you? I simply cannot abide weepy females. Noting the look of anger growing on Gail's face, Jeremy soon changed directions. Look, there's no need for violence either. Just calm your
censored
and let me get you a drink. There has to be something in here worth drinking. Jeremy's voice tapered off as he looked around the room, trying to find some kind of alcohol to give the woman before him. Spying a bottle of bourbon, he poured some into 2 clean glasses he found in the kitchen and came back to sit down. By this time, Gail was certain the man, though beautiful, was absolutely insane and that he'd escaped from a mental health facility somewhere. She was trying to decide how best to get him out of her home when he started to speak again. "So, you were recently attacked, were you? That's how you became infected, you know? Did the committee tell you?" "No." "Oh well, that's how it happened anyway." "Excuse me, may I ask again what you are on about?" "I was attacked last night, yes, but it was only a scratch, and it has healed now." "No big deal," Gail finally responded. "Last night, you say?" "Well, yes, that would explain your confusion then. I suppose you haven't been contacted by anyone yet. Right then, to clear this up, let me demonstrate." Jeremy stood up, and his clothes fell down to the floor as he quickly shifted into tiger form and then back again. Gail climbed deeper into her chair, pulling her legs up in front of her as Jeremy shifted. A scream started to build in her throat, fear filling her body with adrenaline as he shifted back into human form. Gail stared at the now
censored
man and watched as he picked up his suit and tie and started to put the items back on. "As you can see, I am not your average human, and neither are you now. You'll be able to do this on your own once you get it under control, but your first time won't be until the full moon. Unless you'd like a little taste now?" Jeremy said with a wink. "If you catch my meaning?" "No. Not interested at the moment?" "Yes, I suppose it can be a bit disconcerting." "Please do stop gawping, you're making me uncomfortable now." Jeremy settled back into his chair, clothes restored and tie situated correctly at his neck. Gail could not stop gawping, even when he requested it. Her attempts at speech only came out as squawks, not really words, just sounds. Jeremy picked up her glass and put it back in her hand, telling her to drink. Gail slugged it down, figuring she'd need it before the night was over. In fact, she broke the thought off as she stood up, heading for the bottle still on the counter in the kitchen. She poured herself another and drank it down as well, pouring one more before she went back to her seat. "Weretigers are real? They aren't just a fiction written up by comic books and romance novels?" Gail asked in a tremulous voice. "Nope, obviously they are as real as you or I can shift again if you'd like," Jeremy offered with a smile. "No," Gail shouted. "No, that won't be necessary. So, I'm one of you now? That swipe I received last night was more than I thought it was then." "Last night, huh? Odd that they've sent me out so quickly. What happened exactly?" "I was out with some mates in Manchester. Some guy just drove by, swiped at my neck, and here we are," Gail spoke simply, unable to believe that a quick swipe at her neck could result in such a complete upheaval in her life. "Oh yes, someone decided to make you one of us. The committee knows about all the were people in the world. As soon as that little gift entered your bloodstream, they knew all about you and decided on who your guardian would be. A strange situation. You should have been given a choice. Your maker should have asked permission, that is the rule. We live in modern times now, we don't make were people against their will. The only instance of that being allowed is for people like me, who have been born into it by were parents." "Odd." Jeremy looked thoughtful for a moment, then carried on. "So yes, here I am at your service. But don't be a nuisance. I don't have a lot of time for these sorts of things. I have a business to run, you know. Now, are you going to be okay? Because if you are, I have somewhere else to be right now." "Oh, you aren't, are you? I can tell from that look on your face. Come on now, it's not the end of the world, and if you promise not to kill yourself tonight, I can go on my way and come back tomorrow?" Jeremy looked hopeful but resigned. "Oh no, do please leave if you have more urgent business than ruining my life. I mean, you've only just dropped a bomb on me, so if you feel you've done your duty, you can just toddle on down the street to whatever is more important. And I promise, I will not kill myself. That means I wouldn't get the pleasure of seeing you again now, wouldn't it? And I do love the idea of you having to lower yourself to come down to the estate for a little while and deal with this crisis. I understand you may be a busy man, Jeremy, but my life has just been turned upside down. Do see yourself out, please, and forgive me if I don't seem grateful. It's only that you couldn't have possibly been more rude or avuncular if you tried. Please leave me alone now and let me process this. I suppose I'll see you tomorrow, won't I? Gail's voice rose, and so did she as she spoke, and her arm came up as her hand pointed at the door. Yes, well, I'll see you tomorrow then. Here's my card if you need anything else. I won't be available until after midnight likely, and perhaps not after then, but you can try. Gail took the card, imagining just what types of things might keep him preoccupied after midnight. Probably dainty girls like Allison and Petra. Thinking of her friends, Gail sank down into the cushions of her couch, feeling the heat from Jeremy's body there. The man was incredibly beautiful, but simply impossible. Who even spoke like that now? He sounded like a complete tosser, she thought, then thought better of it. He sounded like the sexiest man alive, but with that attitude, she'd never admit it. She'd cut her own
censored
out before she'd stroke that man's ego any more than it had already been stroked. Going to her bed again, she pulled out her phone, hoping to do some research about were people. After seeing him transform, there was little doubt in her mind that they existed. She just wanted to know what was in store for her. She wasn't pleased with the news. Chapter 2. Jeremy walked into the cafe Gail worked in the next day, and stormed up to her. He looked down at her, anger apparent on his face. Gail looked up at him, amusement at his anger making her eyes sparkle. It was really too bad he was such an arrogant ass, because he was seriously gorgeous and taller than her, something that rarely happened. What are you doing here? Why aren't you at home? Well, as you ask so nicely, Gail paused to roll her eyes. I'm working. What does it look like I'm doing? Gail thought it was obvious what she was doing, but apparently not. You are my ward. My ward will not be seen working at some cafe on the high street. Follow me, immediately. He walked out of the cafe, expecting her to follow him. When he turned back, he even looked down, but then looked back up shocked. What are you still doing back there? I told you to follow me. Unless you're planning on paying my bills for me, I'm going to finish making this cup of coffee for this customer, then I'm going to bake some biscuits for tomorrow's shift. Afterward, I'll clean up and go home. I don't see a man like you as the kind that wants to pay a woman's bills for nothing, so I'll be right back here tomorrow when it's my shift as well. I'll gladly pay your bills if it gets you out of here, Jeremy said with a completely straight face. Pardon? Gail finally stuttered out, after staring at the man for a moment. I'll gladly pay your bills if it gets you out of this place, making coffee all day long for cretins. Nope, this is not the life one of my wards is going to have. Come alone, put your penny down and let's get out of here. I would like to take you somewhere. Jeremy even clapped his hands, as if this would make her work faster. Brenda, her supervisor, came up to Gail then, a wide smile on her face and her eyes dancing with joy. Girl, if you have the chance to get out of this place, grab it and hang on tight, and run with it. Go on now, get out. If you ever need to, you can come back, but don't look back or worry about us. We'll be fine. Go on now, get. Brenda was a 45-year-old African American from the Deep South, as she liked to call herself. Gail would miss listening to her talk, her no-nonsense advice and her smile. But yeah, lately her life had taken on a dream quality. She wasn't sure it was all real, maybe she was hallucinating, but for a moment she was going to run with it and see where it took her. Just for a moment, anyway. All right, Gail said as she handed Brenda her penny, grabbed her bag from under the counter and took Jeremy's proffered hand. Where are we going then? You'll see, Jeremy said with a smile. Jeremy led her out to a sleek black sports car. She didn't even know what kind it was, but it had a strange emblem on it. She refused to stroke his ego and ask him what it was. She folded her tall frame into the sleek, low car and tried to keep her mouth closed. The seats were smooth, buttery leather and seemed to mold to her contours. When he turned the car on, the radio started, one of her favorite songs playing through the speakers. She laughed, enjoying the moment, the luxury that she'd never experienced, and turned the radio up. Jeremy looked over at her, for once enjoying what his wealth had bought him. She so loved the car and the radio, two things he'd never really appreciated. He just expected everything to work, to do its job, and he'd never really taken a moment to think about what he had. Maybe he had a lesson to learn here, after all. He'd spoken with the committee insisting they replace him, that he was far too busy to babysit a baby person. They then insisted his assignment was an attempt to teach him a lesson and to expand the number of guardians available. He'd not quite understood what they meant at the time, that he had a lesson to learn, but maybe Gail's pure enjoyment of things that he took for granted was lesson number 1. Smiling to himself, he pointed the car to the motorway, planning to turn Gail's horrible new life into something she'd never dreamed possible. He looked over at her and took in how much she was enjoying the quiet but powerful acceleration of the car, the smooth gear changes, and the gentle roar of the exhaust. He really hadn't noticed how wonderful this car was before. It was a status symbol, nothing more to him, but now he was seeing it with new eyes. He drove the sports car masterfully, making it respond to his every demand, and for the first time, he really responded back to the prompts the car was giving to him as well. Maybe he did need some re-evaluation in his life. Jeremy ended the day, not sure if he'd ever really enjoyed his own wealth this much before. It had just been there his whole life, a means to get something done. Having money was just a way to make even more money. Gail had shown him far more than he'd ever understood before, and she didn't even know it. Jeremy had taken her to some exquisite shops purchasing fine clothes, a new haircut, and other odds and ends, telling her with each purchase that the committee would pay him for the purchases. He simply wanted to give her something nice, a complete U-turn from the man she'd met yesterday, but he wanted to give her something to smile about. He'd watched her at the shop before going in. She'd looked miserable, pained, and ever so sad, standing there making coffee for a man who looked impatient and as dejected as her. He'd felt an urge to take her away from it all. So he had, for now. He wasn't sure she was going to like the next part. For her part, Gail was still working under the notion that this was all a dream. She was flat out somewhere in a coma. Maybe she'd drunk herself into alcohol poisoning that night, and this really was all just a part of her unconscious mind filling up the time for her? What else could explain it all? So she treated it all as part of the dream, with the occasional dose of reality trying to step in, but she'd push it aside, purchasing another bag or scarf or bra or sexy nightgown that she'd never wear for anyone because it was so absolutely scandalous and decadent. She had to admit, though, Dream Gail had some damn good taste. Looking at all the bags Jeremy now held, she wasn't sure they'd all fit into his car. She couldn't remember there being a back seat or a boot. Shrugging, she knew he'd find a way to get them home. "Are you hungry?" Jeremy asked, hoping she was because he was starving. "Sure, what would you like?" Gail said with a smile. "Ever had French?" He didn't want to be presumptuous, but he didn't think she'd ever been to a French restaurant. "No, I can't say that I have." He led her out of the shop, back into the car, drove a few more miles outside of the town, and stopped at a dimly lit inn. It didn't look like much, but the interior was tastefully decorated and doing a lively business. A few tables were empty, and they were quickly seated. Gail looked at the menu, unsure of what anything was. Jeremy saw her discomfort and asked her what meats she liked. She told him just about anything. She even enjoyed vegetarian food, and if he'd order for her, she'd appreciate it. She hadn't bothered learning any foreign languages in school, figuring she'd never have a chance to leave the country anyway, and most French tourists didn't bother coming into the places she'd end up working in, so it hadn't been high on her list of priorities. Gail wasn't stupid. She was highly intelligent. She was just a realist, a poor realist with little hope of leaving the estate without a bunch of kids and a useless husband. So she'd avoided the one but was unable to escape the poverty she'd been raised in. Reality was trying to sink in again, and for the 100th time that day she pushed it away, gnashing her teeth as she did so. Putting a fake smile on her face, she looked over at Jeremy, wondering what his life had been like. He smiled at her, trying to get her to replace that plastic smile with a real one. Gail was a beautiful woman, he thought, especially when she smiled. Her entire face lit up in unbelievably beautiful ways. Her body wasn't bad either. he'd noticed throughout the day. She just needed clothes that enhanced what she had, not took away from it. He watched the candlelight from the tapers on the candle playing over her shoulders and collarbones, thinking how he'd never noticed how attractive those parts of a woman were before, not until Gail, and wanted to see more of her. An image flared to life in his mind, of Gail,
censored,
in his bed, her long hair splayed out over his pillows, her eyes inviting him to join her. He inhaled sharply, and looked at the waiter bringing their food, not wanting to give himself away. Dinner went well. They laughed with each other now that Jeremy had dropped his pretensions, his defenses against the gold diggers and people looking for whatever they could get from him as had happened in the past, his snobbery and illusions, and actually enjoyed himself for once. He'd spent so much time pretending, he'd forgotten that's what he'd been doing all along. Gail's innocent enjoyment of everything he gave her had opened his eyes. After dinner, he drove her down to the river, wanting to walk through the town in the moonlight with her. They were standing on the bridge talking when they heard a scream. Gail rushed down the street, watching as a motorbike sped off. The scene was so familiar, it was almost like watching an instant replay of a few nights before. The girl stood with her hand to her neck, two of her mates looking at it, waving their fists at the receding biker. Gail began shaking, reality finally intruding. It was all real, it wasn't a dream after all. Gail, look at me, Gail, Jeremy implored. It's Ray. It's all real, isn't it? What's going to happen to me, Jeremy? Will it hurt? Is it painful? Am I really going to live to be 200, 300 years old? How old are you? Oh my God, what's been done to me? She fell on the ground then, uncaring about the new dress she had on, her panic totally setting in finally. Come on now, stand up, be a big girl, we need to help this girl. Come on. Just for a moment, then I'll take you home and we can fall apart together, all right? I know you deserve to fall apart right now, but we need to know who she is. This is being planned, I can see that much, so come on, hold my hand. That's it, follow me, love. Jeremy guided her up the street to the trio standing there, trying to decide what to do. Jeremy got their contact information somehow, and called an ambulance for the girl. She was injured much worse than Gail had been, and they waited until the ambulance arrived. Afterward, Jeremy took her to his home, a grand old manor house, to his bedroom, and let her shake until she stopped. Then he gathered her in his arms, sent his assistant a text and told her to clear his schedule for the rest of the week, and fell asleep with the woman who made him feel complete in his arms. A single day, that's all he'd known this woman, and already he felt she was a part of him. There was a maniac loose, turning women into werepeople. It was going to take some investigating, and Gail needed far more of his attention than to be brushed aside as he'd done to her last night. She was a big woman, but she'd had a hard life. This could be the thing that finally broke her. He wasn't going to allow that. The next morning, Jeremy learned that Julia, the woman attacked the night before, now had a guardian and was being moved to that woman's house. He planned with the committee, an investigation being formed to discover the identity of the creator and stop them. He then disappeared, leaving instructions for gifts to be sent to Gail every day he was gone, things to let her know he was thinking of her. He left her a note, telling her he'd be back before she shifted the first time, letting her know that he was doing this for her and that he didn't want to leave but had to. Gail read the note, a smile playing over her lips as his latest gift appeared. A woman to teach her how to apply makeup, not just someone to do it for her. He'd listened when she'd complained about having people do her hair or makeup then. She hated the process because they never showed her how to do it for herself. This woman was patient and kind, guiding Gail in the movements needed to get the
censored
results. Gail sat back, looking at herself. Maybe she was beautiful after all, and dainty in her own way. Her eyebrows were delicate slashes over her eyes. Turning her face, she saw her nose was a thin line down her face but not too thin. Her lips, full and sultry, were now painted a deep red that highlighted her straight white teeth. She wondered if Jeremy would like the effects she'd created. Smiling, she stood up and put on a new dress. Jeremy had sent word he was coming home tonight. She'd stayed in his home, not returning home because she was afraid of being there on her own now. Allison and Petra had come to visit her here, gobsmacked at the luxury Gail had found herself in. Gail covered with the story of a distant relative dying, leaving her a small inheritance that meant she could also live in this house. She didn't know how that was going to work out in the long run, but it would have to suit for now. It was the best fib she could come up with. Gail went down to the kitchen, the brown silk dress flowing around her as she moved. She wanted to project an air of comfort, a welcome home. She knew what was coming in the weeks ahead. Jeremy had told her all he knew before he left, and she wanted to make the next few days peaceful for both of them. Especially after whatever he'd been through since he'd been gone. She heard a car in the driveway, and went to the front door, waiting for Jeremy to come in. When he entered, she smiled, not sure whether to hug him or shake his hand or something else. The smile that broke across his face was wide and happy. He looked tired and haggard, his tie slipping out of his pocket as he held out his arms. Gail moved into his arms, taking comfort from his warmth and smell. He was tired, so tired even she could feel it. Stepping away, she looked up at him as he
censored
her forehead. "You look beautiful, Gail. I'm so glad to be home," he whispered to her. "Thank you for everything. I have some food prepared for you if you're hungry," she said, taking his hand and guiding him to the dining room. Jeremy sank tiredly into his chair, eating as if by memory alone. Gail was determined not to ask him any questions tonight, so she let him eat in peace, then followed him up to his room. She'd taken the one with access from his room, but walked up with him anyway. "Sleep tonight, Jeremy. We'll talk tomorrow, all right?" "Thank you again." Gail slipped away to her room, happy that he was home, and that he was not far from her finally. She knew she'd be shifting soon, and had worried he wouldn't be there. She knew he would be now, and that was a relief. She was terrified of what would happen, though she knew it wasn't painful and there was no threat to her. It was an unknown quantity, something to be feared for now. She didn't want to do it on her own. She slept peacefully, knowing not that she was safe but that she was no longer alone. So, this creator, this madman, is out to make an army with female were-creatures being forced to birth new were-creatures? Why not just turn men? Gail asked as she handed a drink to Julia. Julia's guardian had brought Gail and Julie back together, and they spent a lot of time together now. Julia was small, lithe, and strong, her hair dyed an interesting pattern of blonde and blues. With her blue eyes, she appeared to be too delicate to ever fight back, but she was tough, even before she was attacked. Julia had an intensity about her, though, an air that she would not be beaten no matter what, and that she'd keep fighting. Gail found her beautiful and a pleasure to be around. She'd even had a few dirty thoughts about the woman's mouth, but had brushed them aside as silly. At 23, Julia was in her prime and knew how to show that off. Because males who have been turned aren't as powerful as those of us that have been born to it. We are more likely to have special powers than those turned as well. You may notice after your first times that you can see better, that you can hear better, you may be stronger, or you may be unchanged. Nobody knows what will happen exactly, but it won't be painful. It won't change who you are, not physically anyway. "Will we kill?" Julia asked, fear tinging her voice. "No, not unless you are in danger. Then you will always have the ability to choose, the same as in your human form. You won't change, but you will be more your animal self in this form." "I'm 32 years old. I've not killed anyone yet when I've shifted," Jeremy assured them. "Good. So, what are we doing about him?" Gail asked. She used a tone that brooked no argument, her expression underlining that thought. "Well, we search, we investigate, and we find him. Then we end this madness. An army to take over the world with. It's ridiculous and goes against our ways. If there are too many of us, there will be problems. We can't afford to have those problems. He has to be dealt with. The committee will take care of that, though, not us. Now, what did you two have in mind for the rest of the night?" Jeremy asked, as though the women had something planned. He wasn't going to make assumptions, but he'd been watching the looks they gave each other. He saw there was something there, but wasn't going to push. Not much anyway. He was a man after all, he thought with a wicked smile. Oh, well. Gail cut off her response as Jeremy's mobile chirped. Hello. You're sure it's him? Yes, I'll get them out tonight. Yes, both. We'll leave tonight, yes. No, I won't leave a trail. Just have her stuff brought to my house quickly. We'll leave in 2 hours. Jeremy clicked the phone off and turned to Gail and Julia. Get your clothes ready, we're going to Portugal. Have you got a passport? Good, we'll need that, bring it with you. Ever been to Portugal, ladies? We're heading there tonight. It seems the creator has discovered who you two are, where you're being kept, and has plans for you. I have a house there that's untraceable. We're going to take you there. He apparently wants to kidnap you both and use you. I won't let that happen. Chapter 3. Gail looked out from her patio to the ocean before her. Filled with fruit trees, olive trees, and nut trees, the air was beautifully scented and a constant breeze blew. She went back into the house, something out of a fantasy with large gaping windows to catch the breeze, cool pastel colors, and 3 levels of open rooms. Everything about the house was designed to keep it cool in the summer and warm in the winter. She loved it and spent a lot of time outside. Jeremy brought them here a week ago. Now serenity was settling in as her time to shift approached. Tonight was the night. The moon was going to be full, and Jeremy was ready for both women to shift. They were all still tiptoeing around each other. There was attraction there, but nobody wanted to step on any delicate toes or sore spots. Gail had never been attracted to a woman before, but Julia held her attention. Jeremy was also a force to be reckoned with, and Gail knew there was going to come a breaking point for all of them. And she couldn't wait for the sparks to finally fly. As the sun sank and darkness descended, electricity started to sizzle over Gail's skin. She looked down at her arms, but she couldn't see anything happening, it was only sensation. Then she sensed Julia and Jeremy behind her, and turned to Jeremy with a question on her lips. Before she could ask the question, she shifted, her clothes falling in a pile around her, the soft yellow sundress she'd worn now adorning her head as if it were a veil. What stood in Gail's place was a large tiger, orange, black, and white stripes running the length of her, a long tail waving in warning behind her. Jeremy and Julia watched her, noticing that Gail's clear eyes still stared out at them. Gail roared then, jumping away from the pair, bounding along the walls of the house until she stood on the roof, looking out at the scene before her. Moments later, 2 more tigers joined her, then they too bounded down into the woods behind the house to run free and wild. Gail could not think as she could when she was a human, but there were thoughts and enjoyment of the run, enjoyment of the scents she could smell. She ran to Julia and knocked her over playfully, the pair wrestling as they pushed each other through a stream into some leaves piled on the ground. They stared into each other's eyes, a stillness taking over them all as the women shifted back into their human forms. Still, Julia and Gail stared into each other's eyes, neither moving until Jeremy knelt down beside them in human form. He reached a hand out to Gail's face, unable to resist touching her lips. She smiled up at him, and then darted away in tiger form again. Jeremy and Julia shifted as well, chasing after Gail. It was amazing, Gail thought. This sense of freedom filling her heart with joy as she ran back to the house. She climbed the walls, hopping from one patio to the next, and was amazed at her dexterity. She entered her bedroom window, effortlessly shifting back into human form as she did so, heading straight for the shower. As the water heated up, she let it flow over her hair and down her body, looking out of the open door at Jeremy and Julia. Julia smiled back at her and mouthed the word, later, before slipping back off into the darkness in her tiger form to prowl the night. Jeremy stared, however, lost in the beauty of the woman before him. Her
censored
were high and firm, her waist round and feminine. Her hips and buttocks were also something a man could get his hands on, and he slipped into the shower with her, running his hands over her water-slickened skin, sliding up to tease her.
Censored
Delicately. She pushed her buttocks back into Jeremy, inviting him in, wanting more than just his touch.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
You all right? He asked gently. Perfect. You, she replied. About the same. Perfect, complete, whole for the first time in my life. You've given me so much in such a short time, Gail, so very much. And I love you for it. I will love you always for who you are and what you've given me. And I love you, Jeremy Stonebridge. If you were dirt poor and homeless, I'd still love you. You've given me just as much as I've given you, and I don't just mean the wealth part. You've given me companionship, love, and a chance to grow. I couldn't ask for any more than that. She smiled at him again, feeling shy and at a loss for words to express herself adequately. How do you tell someone you've turned their whole world upside down, but in a good way? She cuddled up beside him when he came to rest beside her, throwing her leg over his abdomen to hold him close as she listened to his strong heart beating within his.
Censored.
She fell asleep there feeling safe, loved, and at peace. She moved later, when Julia came in and lay down on the other side of her, taking comfort from the warmth of the other woman's body behind her and the heat from the man in front of her. Cocooned, she slept deeply, not hearing a sound. Jeremy woke the next morning, alone, cold, and confused. Searching the house, he found he was completely alone, both Gail and Julia gone. All he found was a length of rope, small enough to tie someone up but large enough to not break. They were gone, and he had no idea when they'd been taken or where they were. Jeremy caught himself before he let out a roar, going back to Gail's room to retrieve his mobile to make the first of several calls. Chapter 4. Gail woke up in a dark room, with no memory of how she got there or who brought her there. She could sense Julia beside her, and tried to wake the other woman up. Julie came around, groggily. It seemed they'd been drugged somehow, but Gail wasn't sure how. She had an idea about who had her, but no idea of anything else. Using her teeth, she managed to get the rope off of her wrists, before working it off of her ankles. Turning to the still groggy Julia, she helped her to remove her bonds as well, then pulled the smaller woman close, trying to see her face in the darkness. I have to guess that whatever they gave us, they gave you too much and not enough to me. Come on, little babe, open those eyes for me, we have to figure out how to get out of here. Julia's head lolled on her shoulders, but she opened her eyes, one at a time. Where are we? Julia slurred. I have no idea, but it's dark, so maybe we can escape unnoticed. Come on, follow me. Gail pulled Julia up off of the floor, and pulled the other woman to a crack of light she spied in the darkness. As she suspected, it was a door. Putting her ear to the door, she could hear two men talking. You gave them enough to keep them out for a while then? That dark-headed one is big, I hope you gave her a double dose. Gail thought indelicate thoughts about the man, hoping he caught syphilis. Well, head on back to the main house then, the boss wants us to go out and get 2 more tonight, so we have to hurry. He wants to start his operation soon. Gail could just see the air quotes as he spoke. Gail listened as the men left, then cracked the door open wide. She quietly stepped out of the door, listening for any sounds. She heard nothing, so she pulled Julia along behind her, hoping to find an exit soon. She crept through the building and found a door in the back. Opening it, she saw it was an exit leading into an alley. The other end opened onto a street. She quickly pulled Julia along with her, heading out of the alley and ducking into a shop on the corner of the street. Looking out, she could see more shops with words in Spanish, instead of the Portuguese she'd become accustomed to. Okay, how long were we out? Because they've had time to bring us to Spain, obviously. Right, come on, Julia, let's find the police and get out of here. Wherever here is. Searching through her pockets, wondering who dressed her, Gail didn't find anything of use except a little bit of money. Counting it up, she found she had 20 euros, which might be enough to make a phone call. Spying a phone booth, she pulled Julia along with her and dialed, hoping Jeremy would soon pick up. Hello, he answered, hope in his voice. Jeremy. It's Gail. I have Julia with me, but I have no idea where we are. Spain, I think. Just stay on the line, sweetheart, and we'll find you. I'm so glad to hear your voice. What the hell happened? Gail asked. I have no idea, but we're going to get you out of there. I have both of your passports and a plane ready. All right, I want you to go to this address, look on the other side of the road there, do you see it? Go there now, just get in there. You'll have security and everything else you need. I'll be there shortly, all right? I love you, darling, now go. Just drop the phone and go. Jeremy implored. Gail ran across the street, Julia in tow, until she was in the reception area of the hotel, being ushered to an elevator with 3 burly men surrounding her and Julia. The lift quickly had them at the penthouse suite, where the room was speedily looked over by the guards who positioned themselves at the door and at the windows. Gail left Julia in the bed to sleep off the effects of whatever they'd been given, and took up her own position at the window, watching for Jeremy to arrive. She fell asleep after one of the men moved a chair over for her to sit in, her head against the window pane. She awoke when she felt Jeremy enter the room. He rushed to her, saw that she was safe, and swept her up into his arms to hold her close. Gail launched herself at the same time he pulled, and they landed on the bed beside Julia, tangled up in each other both.
Censored.
Each other's face. Julia awoke, looking at them both like they were insane. What the hell? Can't a girl get some sleep around here? Who are those men and why are they in my room? Julia asked, clueless about all that had transpired. You really don't remember a thing, Julia? Gail asked. No, I don't, Gail, where are we? Julia asked, a definite tone of fear entering her voice. We're in Spain, but not for long. I'm taking you ladies home to England. The committee now have the creator in their own version of a secret prison, and he won't be seeing the light of day again anytime soon. They tracked him from that warehouse he was holding you in, then nabbed him as he tried to escape into Morocco. Now I'm going to take you two home, and we're going to start living our lives as we should have done long ago. You two ready to go? I've sent all of your stuff from Portugal ahead, and actually if you'd like, we can go back there. I think I'd love to go back to Portugal, Jeremy. How about you, Julia? Portugal or England? Gail asked with a quirky smile. Oh, definitely Portugal. You won't get me off of that beach for a week at least. Let's go. So we'll never see the creator again, you're sure? What about his minions? Gail asked as they relaxed by the pool, watching the sun go down. Nope, they're all gone too. None of them will ever bother us again. I swear to you, Jeremy assured Gail as he slipped his hand into hers. Good then, I'm going to run for a while, want to join me? And just like that she shifted, Julia and Jeremy both joining her. They ran through the woods for an hour before finally coming back, all diving into the pool as tigers, but emerging as people again, their skin gleaming wetly. Gail headed for a pile of cushions, stretching out beneath the stars to dry off. The stars were blocked out by a female shape, then Julia pounced, going directly for Gail's mouth as she landed with her leg between Gail's thighs, snug up to her center.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
Well now, I call that a perfect ending to this night, Gail chirped, utterly satisfied with the direction her life had now gone in. Oh, I'm definitely up for that again. Any time, Julia responded, cuddling up to Gail to
Censored.
Her softly as she cupped Gail's larger
Censored.
before taking a
Censored.
into her mouth. I could watch you two forever. But I think you're going to kill me. Oh, you can keep up, old man. You've effed me 5 times in a single night. You can keep us satisfied, I'm sure, Gail chimed in. Well, either way, just you, Gail, or both of you, I'm not complaining. I love you now and always. Julia is her own person and she's welcome to join us, but you're the only one I truly need, babe. No offense, Julia, but Gail just gets me. Jeremy looked up, hoping he hadn't caused any bad feelings. Oh, no problems here, Jeremy. I love you both to bits, but I have far more to discover about the world. I'd love to know I can come back when I want to, but I know you two are special. I'm fine, don't worry about that. Julia had let Gail's
Censored.
go for a moment, but she went back to it as soon as she finished speaking. I love these
Censored.
woman, were her last words before pulling Gail down and spreading her legs wide to dive between them again. Gail laughed, her every dream now fulfilled. Life simply couldn't get any better than this, as she lost herself in Julia's mouth. Her man, a ravishing female lover, and one of the most interesting lives ever ahead of her. What more could a girl ask for? Thank you for reading my book. If you like this story, I think you'll enjoy my book. Get your copy of Sold to the Werewolf now. Please leave a review if you like this book. That's the best thing you can do to help authors like me, so others can find my books. It can be as long or as short as you'd like. Even a star rating is amazing and appreciated. Thanks in advance. About Summer Cooper. Thank you so much for reading. Without you, it wouldn't be possible for me to be a full-time author. I hope you enjoy reading my books as much as I do writing them. Besides, obviously, reading and writing, I also love cuddling my dogs, shouting at Alexa, being upside down aka yoga, and driving my family cray-cray. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Goodreads, BookBub. Get in touch at hello@summercooper.com. www.summercooper.com. Closing credits. This has been Tigers Bond. Written by Summer Cooper. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.